We are on we're at letter 18, which is on page 55. Okay. So letter 18, this letter comes with a little bit of an introduction. On January 16th, 1962, a woman wrote to the Rebbe. She had been raised in a non-believing, non-observant home. Now she had attended 2 lectures on Torah True Judaism, which touched her deeply and presented her with a dilemma. In what should I believe, she asked the Rebbe, in the path along which I have been raised and educated over many years, or in that which I heard from a stranger in the course of 2 evenings? Great question. What follows is a freely translated excerpt of the Rebbe's reply, dated Shvat 16, the year 1962. Her question is a question I think that is a very common question, and that is that yes, there are some compelling points that were made here. However, I was raised a different way. I know other things, or I've been influenced in other ways. How do I know what is true is in some way what she's asking over here. So I'm very convinced by the lectures, but how do I know that I should actually rely on them? So the Rebbe responds, certainly you have heard of the expression return to roots. I'm sure that you're also aware that an education does not work in a vacuum. Since in each and every individual there are things that are rooted in the soul prior to the onset of the education process, things that stem from the innermost heart of the soul. So the Rebbe is saying that first of all, surely you've heard of the expression "return to the roots," meaning there is something that exists within every person called their roots, which is their deepest self, their roots. Number one. Number two is education. The way we are educated, what we would maybe also refer to as nurture, never exists within a vacuum. All of the nurturing happens within a context, and it's the context of our nature, of who we are. So even when we have an education, that education is on top of the very essence of our being, the heart of the soul. So that's the first point the Rebbe is making. In other words, yes, you had education, but that education, it was on top of the essence of who you are. Furthermore, no education or conditioning can change these things. No education can ever change who a person is. Only suppress them for a longer or shorter period of time. The only thing it can do is suppress it. So we can suppress who we are, and that can be for a longer time or shorter time. This has been repeatedly demonstrated in the field of education, as well as in medical science, biology, and other fields. This is the reason why we often see that a single lecture or a short discussion in education of an extremely brief duration might affect a most basic change in a person. This is the reason why we find that there are people who in a single lecture or in a very short discussion, a major change will take place in the person, despite the fact that they were educated differently their entire life. And that is because this single conversation is awakening the very roots of this person. And the second you awaken the roots of a person, it automatically is going to overtake anything that was placed on top of the roots. All this person needed was a catalyst that would affect the removal of whatever has been covering up that which already exists in the inner reaches of his soul. By the way, this is very, very profound. This is a very fundamental way that Hasidus looks at a person and the psychology of a person. It's very important to understand this. It's very profound because it clarifies some major dilemmas that people frequently have and people ask me about all the time. And that is, but how do I know? But how do I know? And there is, as I said this in one of our 2 weeks ago in our JLI class on Monday night, there is a knowing that is deeper than a provable knowing. There's a knowing that's deeper than a an intellectual knowing. There's a knowing where my being just knows this is true or that this is right, and that knowing is when we get into alignment with our roots or the essence of our soul. Then we know it to be true no matter what anyone says, because there's something even deeper than our intellect that becomes very clear about the truth of this. So when we have a dilemma like this woman has, where she's hearing lectures, right, and she also was educated a certain way, so she has a conflict now. The question is, the question that needs to be asked is whether this conflict is, what are the two conflicting elements here? That's the question. So when I know something intellectually because I've been educated a certain way, and then I have something that resonates so deeply with me that I just stand with it, then we can be sure that it's our roots that have been revealed in that experience. And our roots are always deeper and more truthful than any ideas that we come to. That's really what the Rebbe is saying. And this is a very profound piece of guidance that you can use for yourself, and you will probably be able to use for other people who seek out your guidance, whether it's your children or your spouse or someone as well, because this is a very common dilemma that people have. Now, sometimes we will go to a lecture, and that lecture will be intellectually compelling. It won't resonate with us in a deep, soulful way, in a deep being way. It's just, wow, that's really compelling. He's making some great arguments. Okay, so that's very different. That's not touching on our roots. But when something hits a part of us that just resonates very deeply, then we know we're touching on something deeper than anything we've been educated with until now. So to continue the letter, the above is the answer to your question, what should I believe? The very fact that you are so deeply impressed by what you heard, and that's the key. Those are the key words I believe here. That you're so deeply impressed by what you heard. Now, how do we know that this person was so deeply impressed by what they heard? This woman was so deeply impressed by what they heard. How do we know that? We know that because they were compelled enough to write a letter to the Lubavitcher Rebbe about their dilemma. That's how we know, right? So sometimes, like, I don't know if you've ever had this. I've had instances where this has happened to me, where, in general, like if I hear something is very nice, very compelling, very good, okay. But there have been rare times where I've said, I must call this person up, right? That's something that's very compelling. The moment you're ready to do something which is out of the norm, or you're starting to think differently, or you have some type of an emotional reaction, those are signs that this is very, very compelling to you. And so being that, the very fact that you were so deeply impressed by what you heard in the course of the 2 evenings attests to the truth of what our sages have told us thousands of years ago. All Jews are believers, the children of believers. And there's something unique about the Jew. So the Rebbe is focusing on this because it's a Jewish woman who's writing to him. We have a teaching that all Jewish people are ma'aminim b'nei ma'aminim, which means believers, sons of believers, which means that we have deeply rooted beliefs that are embedded in the essence of our soul, which are not cultivated beliefs. They are inherent beliefs. So the Rebbe is saying, as Jews, we know this is true, that we have inherent belief in us. Now, again, there can be many things covering that belief, and therefore we're not in touch with it. But the moment something triggers that, it just shoots up as a truth. It is only that their faith might at times be obscured by a layer of foreign elements. So fortunate is one in whom this layer has been removed early in life, who recognizes the truth and returns to his roots. What a blessing when a person has an opportunity. This is really a blessing. And by the way, I would say that everyone here in this class is very blessed in this way, because something is compelling you to be drawn to the truth of the Torah, which is why you're here. And that's a huge blessing, that you've been able to remove the layers, to recognize the truth and return to your roots. My hope is that these lines, though few in quantity, considering the import of the subject, will suffice to shed light on the matter, and it will be my pleasure to receive good news from you regarding all the above. The Rebbe encourages her to share good news about what she's going to do in the follow-up to this. We have a comment in the chat box. Is that why Tanya resonates so deeply? Even if you never heard of it before? The answer to that is yes. And that is exactly why Tanya resonates so deeply, because it resonates with our soul. Even when, that's why, sometimes people will ask me questions of faith, and I cannot prove to them that the matter of faith that I tell them is true. I cannot prove it, which means I cannot prove it intellectually. Despite the fact that I cannot prove it intellectually, does not weaken my faith in that matter one bit. And in fact, in some respect, my belief in that matter is stronger, because when we believe in something, not because it is proven intellectually to us, but because we simply know it soulfully to be true, that's a much more powerful relationship. I want to explain this a little bit. It is a very important point. If I believe in an idea, or I say I know an idea to be true because it makes sense, it's very possible that someone more intelligent will come along and weaken the solid intellectual foundation I have to believe in this idea. And I've had this experience in life where I believe certain things, and then someone gave me deeper intellectual insight. They're smarter than me. They shared with me things I never thought of, whatever it may be. And I realized, well, it's not so compelling actually, right? So anything founded on intellect is vulnerable. Its truth is vulnerable. But anything founded on the deepest roots of your soul knowing it, they are not vulnerable, because they are an expression of who you are. That's the most powerful way of knowing. That's why a knowing of faith is much more powerful than a knowing of intellect. Now, in the world, people don't know this. People think, if you can prove it to me, right? The challenge that we have is being willing to trust our inner knowing and having confidence in that. That is a challenge that we have, and that's an art that we develop over time of letting go of having to prove it. Like I can have someone laugh at me and think I'm naive because I believe something so strongly to be true, even though I can't prove it, while I know, as they're laughing at me, that the joke is on them, not on me. Right? That's a confidence we have to be able to reach. Now, yes, there is a risk. I'm trying to flesh this out in a wholesome fashion. Yes, there is a risk, because when we believe things that we cannot empirically prove, we can believe in a lot of crazy things. And by the way, I know many, many people, good, wonderful people who I would call close friends, who do have superstitious beliefs, which I am very uncomfortable with the fact that they believe those things, and I find them to be very unhealthy. However, yes, that's part of the art. That's the art. It's being able to hone ourselves in and find balance where we know what is an expression of our soul and where we know what is an expression of us trying to create safety and comfort for ourselves by believing in things which have no substance. So yes, and that's all the risk of being a person of faith. Any questions or objections before we move on? Okay, fantastic. I guess that was clear. Let's go to the next letter. Eliminate confusion. Letter 19, page 57, the path forward. November of 1967. Blessing and greeting. I duly received your undated letter. Since it has just been received, I assume it was sent out recently. You begin your letter by saying that you have been confused, and this is why you have not written for a long time. Generally speaking, it is well to remember that the Torah is called Torah Or. The Torah is light, because the essential nature of the Torah is to illuminate man's path in life. And when the path is illuminated in this way, one can see clearly which actions and conduct are good and which are to be avoided. The Rebbe establishes something. And this is something, by the way, I just want you to know. The Rebbe establishes certain things, which is what he uses as a basis for the way he views everything. And it's very important for us to slowly establish these foundations in our own perspective. So his foundation always is Torah or. Torah is light. If you want to have clarity as you move forward in life, then you have to look at the Torah and see how the Torah gives us guidance. There is nothing else in the world that can give you guidance and clarity like the Torah, because the Torah is the light of God. God gave it to us to bring illumination into our lives, and it's a gift he gave to us as a Jewish people. So we can have all of our ideas about how to solve different issues and deal with different problems. And some of them may be very sensible and somewhat reasonable and somewhat effective. There is nothing that will bring clarity to a person and focus in their life like the guidance of the Torah. Now, I'm going to say, and I think the Rebbe is going to say this in the letter, that it's, the Torah is infinite wisdom, meaning it's not only is it infinite in the depth of it, it's infinite in the breadth of it. So, it could take 100 lifetimes for a person to study the entire Torah. Not only that, all of us are blessed differently with our capacity and depth of understanding. So we cannot always understand or extract from the Torah the guidance that we need. But it's all in the Torah, and if we have the right guidance, and we seek out the right guidance from people who maybe, and every soul is designed uniquely. So some souls have a better, have a stronger affinity to legalities. Some souls have a strong affinity to numbers. We know this, right? Some people are outstanding with numbers. Some people are outstanding with legal things. Some people are outstanding with esoteric teachings, spirituality, abstract thinking. So they're all different types, and every mind is fashioned by God, custom for the person, specifically in a certain manner. So to one person I would go to for guidance for this type of an issue, for another person maybe for that type of an issue, but all of those people are guided by the Torah. That means that they have deep Torah wisdom in their area of Torah. And that's how we get the guidance of the Torah, even though we ourselves necessarily don't have it. So, to continue the letter. So first the Rebbe establishes this. Number one, there's Torah, and Torah is illuminating. Of course, the Torah is vast and cannot be easily mastered by all. For this reason, there is a resume of the Torah in the Shulchan Aruch, that's the code of Jewish law, which is a concise code of daily Jewish conduct. The code of Jewish law basically is how we are meant to conduct ourselves as Jews, how we're meant to conduct ourselves in business, how we're meant to conduct ourselves in our private lives, how to get dressed, what you do in the morning, how to eat food, all of these things, the manner of eating food, all of this is discussed in the Code of Jewish Law. And then how to observe a Shabbos. What are the laws of observing a Shabbos? How to observe a holiday, how to observe Hanukkah, how to light the menorah. All of these things are in the Code of Jewish Law. But even the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, is not easily accessible to everyone. Now, the Code of Jewish Law can be quite, it could get dense and complex at times. I teach a class on Jewish law on Thursday evenings, and it can be quite involved with multiple opinions about a single matter. And that is why there are rabbis to be consulted. Though we don't all need to be an expert in Jewish law. We have people who are experts in Jewish law, and we consult them. Since it is their purpose and function to teach and guide the individual Jew on how to live his daily life in accordance with the Torah. Right? Yesterday, I reached out to 2 different rabbis about 2 different matters of law to find out, to get some guidance about, because I'm not an expert in those areas. All this gives everyone the opportunity to develop a proper and meaningful way of life. What does all of this do? All of this gives us the opportunity to develop a proper and meaningful way to live, and above all, to have the complete trust in God, whose benevolent providence extends to each and every one individually. God has providence over every single one of us. That means that God watches over every single one of us. And God's watching over us is benevolent providence. That means that when God orchestrates all of the circumstances in our life, right? And at any given moment, that right now I am where I am in this context, with the relationships with with these people, etc., all of that, God is always benevolence. It's always benevolence, even though we may not feel the benevolence. And by the way, for those who are taking the JLI course, we're going to have a fantastic class tonight on divine providence, an amazing elucidation, clarity on this subject of how God orchestrates everything in our lives from a place of benevolence to help us fulfill the purpose He put us in this world for. So we have to have faith in that. Just a moment. Right. So we have to have faith, complete trust in the benevolence that God gives us. Above all, it's necessary to cultivate sincere and wholehearted confidence in God. As it is written, thou shalt be wholehearted with God, your God. It's very important to cultivate sincere, which means, by the way, childlike, wholehearted confidence in God. If we go through life, our whole life questioning, well, how do is God here? Is not God? We have to get to a place of real confidence and faith in God. That is an enormous power that we carry with us through life. And that takes time to cultivate, and the gate of trust, which we learned, some of us have here, learned in the past, is a very powerful source of developing that, thinking about that. And then also the key always is to integrate it into our lives, to remind ourselves in the moment, no, this is not a crisis. This is where God brought me. He brought me here for a purpose. It may feel miserable right now, and I may not know what the purpose is, but I'm here for a divine purpose. And thus eliminate all sorts of worries, anxieties, and confusions. When a person does this, what we're doing is we are eliminating all sorts of worries, anxieties, and confusions. Why? Because now I know I'm here with purpose. It develops a sense of security in that there is a Lord and Master who takes care not only of the world as a whole, but also of each individual with loving care. So God is taking care of me now in putting me in this circumstance. And even though that may feel extremely challenging to me now, sometimes overwhelmingly challenging, however, I can always go back to reminding myself of that. And therefore, I know that this isn't random and that this is purposeful. Even if, as you write, a person sometimes fails to live up to expectation, which we will always do, by the way, we will always find ourselves failing to live up to expectation because we're very imperfect people. There is always the knowledge that nothing stands in the way of tshuva. A person can always correct that. No problem. You get better. Get better at it. It's no crisis. Except, we have to accept our failures. It is surely unnecessary to elaborate to you on the above, but only to emphasize that we are all commanded to serve God with joy and gladness of heart. And upon reflection, it is possible to see how every happening can serve as a lesson in true divine service. That with reflection, we will see how everything that happens in our life can serve as a lesson in true divine service. So imagine if we start looking at things that way. Like, God, what is God telling me here? What does God want me to learn from this? We're starting, instead of looking at it like, woe is to me, the victim of the situation, we ask ourselves, what are we supposed to be receiving? God's speaking to me. What is God telling me? What is God telling me? And then we do that with every single moment in our lives. We have there was a comment. The problem is people tell us these wacky beliefs. Oh, this goes back to, I guess, the previous letter. Often close to hallucinations, and we can't confront them or they'll never speak to us again. This is correct. You will have people in your life, as you obviously do, who will tell you wacky beliefs or close to hallucinations, or maybe in fact hallucinations, and you cannot tell them anything because they'll never speak to you again. If you know that they will not speak to you again, you should not tell them anything. You should just smile. But they will know that you're not fully on board with them, at least fully on board, if not entirely on board with them, without you saying anything. And that itself is already influence. And you just say, I hear what you're saying. Very interesting. But you don't take on someone that you have been able to confirm you cannot have a healthy, a reality conversation with. Because there would be no point in doing that. And a reminder, our job isn't to fix everybody. And a reminder that there are some people that we cannot fix. The best thing we can do is influence. And our influence sometimes is passive. It's by being who we are, not by imposing on another person or enforcing on another person. So where we can share, we share. Where we don't share, we are only influencing through being who we are. And that's, by the way, as the Rebbe writes in other letters, is the most powerful way to impact this world, is by being who we are. Right? By the mere fact that my presence before someone else, they know that I believe that this was from God. Even though they don't believe that, I am already having influence because I am a presence of a belief that they have to contend with by the fact that I am in front of them. And I may not even say it to them. And they may espouse that this is God, where is God, that God wasn't here, and this and that, or whatever else they may espouse. And while they espouse that, I know, right? I don't say a word. I just say, I hear you. Right? They know what I believe. And it's all good. And my influence is still there. So that's my comment on that comment. Okay. We're good, everyone? By the way, I know you're all muted because so we don't get feedback, but that doesn't mean that you cannot comment. You can simply unmute yourself if you have a comment to make. Just mentioning. Okay, let's go to the next letter. We're up to letter 20. Eliminate confusion. Who wants to eliminate confusion? Confusion is so much fun. Dear Rebbe, I've been religious for many years, but I'm not sure anymore. Okay, this is going to be a fascinating response the Rebbe has to this individual who was religious for many years and now is questioning that. By the grace of God, the year was 1983. June 1983, Brooklyn, New York, reading and blessing. This is in reply to your letter of June 20th. Now, the way the Rebbe starts this letter is not so uncommon for the Rebbe, by the way. It's a style the Rebbe uses. The Rebbe says, I must say that this is one of the most amazing letters I have ever received. And in quotations, amazing. Based on a most amazing conclusion of a person who, after following the Jewish way of life for 17 years, has now decided that it was wrong because he did it for the sake of his wife and family. I want to tell you something. To me, this is such a common thing. Not this specific scenario, but the scenario of someone living a certain way and then saying, I have come to the awareness that I've always been doing this for the people around me, but I wasn't being true to myself. Especially nowadays, has become more common. But I've not been true to myself, and now I'm going to be true to myself, right? And most often, in my experience, when people do this or say this, they are in fact in a state of confusion, and they're trying to bring clarity, and they're trying to bring clarity by working it out in their own head, but their own head is confused. And by the way, their own head is confused not necessarily because there is something fundamentally wrong with this person, but only because we are all somewhat confused in our own head, because there are so many biases and agendas that we have that it's really unlikely, it's virtually impossible for us to get clarity on our own, as we've discussed many times. So therefore, we're in confusion. And we have to go to someone outside of us to hear this out, instead of just making this assumption now that because I notice that sometimes I have a tendency to do things out of peer pressure, or because of pressure from my wife or other people in my family, then now my whole lifestyle is because of it's generally what happens. Because of a little thing, we now stretch that over to explain our entire life. And that's really what the Rebbe was saying to him. And the Rebbe calls it amazing. It's amazing to me that you would stretch this to now describe that the reason why you were living for 17 years a certain way is only because for your wife and kids, but you didn't really believe it. Hence, he feels impelled to make a radical change, which a radical change, he was going to change his whole lifestyle from a religious lifestyle to a non-religious lifestyle, which is quite radical. Although, when people actually are approaching a religious lifestyle from a non-religious lifestyle, right, which is the field I work in, right? So I and my colleagues are very careful that a person doesn't make a radical change, meaning that they don't shift their lifestyle from one place to another very quickly. Why not? A very simple reason. It's unstable. And what's the problem with that? Instability is not sustainable because it's unstable. So it's not sustainable. So if it's going to be productive, it's got to be slow. Human beings cannot change drastically. We have to slowly acclimate to the transitions we're making. Now, some people can do it a little bit quicker, a little bit slower. Depends on the person. But overall, a radical change, never, ever, ever. The second I see someone making a radical change, I stop them. I know that there's a little bit of instability in them. It's a bad sign. It's not a bad sign. It's just a sign of their personality. And some of us have that. I probably have some of that myself, right? I'd like to do things quickly, drastically, which is not a good thing to do. And I slow them down. I tell them, stop. No, you cannot do this. You cannot do this. In fact, my son just shared with me, he teaches rabbinical students who are new to Judaism, who come to yeshiva, rabbinical college, like 18, 19, 20, 21, 22-year-old boys. My oldest son, some of you know who he is. And there was a new student that came, and he was really new to everything. And they were doing the grace after meals, which we call the benching after a meal that a bunch of the students were at his home. And this new student was reading everything in the English. And there was another student there, in his exuberance to have influence on this new student, was encouraging him to make sure to read every word, etc. And so in the middle of the grace after meals, while this new student was in the middle, my son told him, stop, you're not allowed to say any more. So the other student who was encouraging him was like a little bit shocked. He said, what do you mean? He's supposed to say the whole thing. Why are you stopping him? Right? And so he explained, because he wanted the other student to know, as well as the new student, that when you start something new, you have to do this in a digestible fashion. You can't just overwhelm yourself. Otherwise, you won't get where you want to go. So he was actually using it as a teaching moment, which is this exact point. So, so this person now is deciding, because they have some thought that everything they're doing, which of course, when you say everything, whenever we say everything, right, we already know that we're not being honest, because we can never say everything I do is because of, right, or all of my religion is because of. You say sometimes I do things because of other people. That would be a much more honest way of saying it. So the Rebbe is saying that it's he feels impelled to make a radical change. Even though by his own admission, and the letter that he wrote to the Rebbe, he acknowledges, the conclusion is not based on irrefutable proofs. He's not 100% sure, but is solely motivated by strong doubts and insufficient knowledge about God and the need of observing his mitzvahs. So the Rebbe continues, curiously, as strong as his doubts are about the past, there seems to him no doubt whatever about his future course. He has doubts. He questions why he was doing things in the past. And yet, his decision about what he's going to do in the future is very conclusive. That's odd. If you're not sure about why you're doing things in the past, why are you so clear about what you should do in the future? So much so that he's already initiated steps to put an end to his past 17 years of life and family. Now, I want you to understand something. Obviously, the Rebbe is the strongest proponent of every Jew living by Torah and mitzvos, right? However, if you listen to everything the Rebbe is telling him, the Rebbe has not made that argument to him. The Rebbe is not saying every Jew should be observe Torah and mitzvahs, be religious, whatever it is. The Rebbe is just speaking to him as a human being. No matter what you are committed to, which you want to stop being committed to, slow down. You have no basis for what you're doing. And that is reckless, no matter what it is. Even if it was, he loved skiing. And suddenly, I'm never going to ski anymore. So it's just a crazy, it's not a way to go through life. That's really what the Rebbe is telling him. Moreover, by your own recognition, your conclusion is based on doubts. Albeit strong doubts, but doubts nevertheless. If so, why all this haste to carry out your decision? You're in doubt. When you're in doubt, you don't make quick decisions. When you're in doubt, you deliberate. Like I shared, maybe it was on. I had a big dilemma sitting on me for a few months, and I didn't make a decision. I didn't stop what I was doing until I felt I found the clarity I was looking for, and then I stopped. So you don't just stop what you're doing. If you don't have clarity, okay, get clarity. But we don't do radical things. If so, why all this haste to carry out your decision? Surely before taking steps that even from your viewpoint could possibly be destructive to yourself and your family, don't you think you ought first to discuss your doubts and conclusions with knowledgeable friends, both from, which means religious, and if you so desire, not religious? The Rebbe saying you can even speak to your non-religious friends. After 17 years, a little more time wouldn't make all that difference. After all, you've been this way for 17 years. Give yourself some time. It's not like another year this way is going to destroy your life in any way. Of course, which the Rebbe doesn't elaborate on, I don't think, in the letter, it's obvious, like it would be obvious to me, and it would probably be obvious to you. This man's married. He's got children. They've all been moving on a certain path, right? To suddenly turn that upside down creates a very great upheaval and an enormous sense of instability for his wife and kids. So this is not a simple matter. So he's got to really think this through and have real clarity before he makes a decision. All of that is what the Rebbe is basically telling him. So after all, and by the way, for the very same reason, when someone is coming closer to Judaism, if they're going to do that as an upheaval of their old life, that will create a great upheaval in their family. That's another reason why they must not make a drastic change. It has to be done in a way that slowly, it's sort of like you're going into a cold pool. You're going slowly. I mean, actually, I should say it's better to jump into a cold pool, but maybe that's a bad example, right? But something that really requires a real digesting, right? And acclimating. You cannot do that quickly. Let me say this. I don't know if you've ever gone into a very hot bath. Well, you probably have, I would assume, right? If you're going to a very hot bath, you're going slowly. That you don't jump into, right? And Yiddishkeit is warm, actually. It's hot. So it's you're embracing the warmth of God. So you do that slowly. So in other words, one of the points I'm trying to make here is, which the Rebbe's not saying, I'm trying to bring out from the Rebbe's letter, is that there isn't this agenda here that the Rebbe's living in. The Rebbe's actually giving a tremendous life guidance in how we deal with transitions in life and how we think them through. And they can't be drastic and they can't be in haste. After all, when a Jew is in doubt, lacking strong convictions about the need to do mitzvos, the logical way of thinking is as follows. If after further intensive study, his convictions are strengthened, all the better. On the other hand, should he come to the conclusion that what he was doing was unnecessary, then the most he could regret would be the inconvenience of having spent a few minutes putting on tefillin every weekday morning, or having deprived himself of non-kosher food, having kept Shabbos and Yom Tov, and so on. Now the Rebbe is saying, let's make a risk-benefit analysis. When you make a decision, you make a risk-benefit analysis. If what I'm doing is right, and I stop doing it, I'm bringing destruction to my life. If what I'm doing is wrong, and I continue doing it for another year, what is the risk? Inconvenience. Not upheaval, but inconvenience. So he's telling the guy, look at it that way. Instead of dropping everything suddenly, continue for a year and continue deliberating. Worst case, you'll have inconvenienced yourself by all of these observances for another year, right? But if you stop suddenly, you may be bringing an enormous upheaval to your life, which actually would be the case as we know it, but the Rebbe is not even saying that to him. In other words, he wouldn't be aligned with the truth. But if he recklessly gives up his Jewish way of life, and eventually, sooner or later, he is bound to realize that the Torah and mitzvahs and Jewish way of life are indeed our life and the length of our days, as we say, both in this life and in eternal life, then he will never forgive himself for having treated it so lightly. Sometimes we make a hasty decision, and it's very hard to make that up. I've seen people who have done hasty things like this, like the author of the letter to the Rebbe, and then they feel embarrassed, they feel ashamed, they realize after a few years that they made a very big mistake. It's very difficult for them to ever come back because of all of the internal turmoil that they've created for themselves and all of that shame. Of course, they always could, but it makes it difficult for them. So making hasty decisions is never, ever a good thing. As for your doubts about the basics of Yiddishkeit, by the way, I will say, the only time I advise people to make hasty decisions, which I sometimes do, is when a person is dealing with something which I would compare to cancerous. You can't play games. God forbid someone has cancer, they don't have time. There's no time. Time is against you. You got to do something quickly, hastily. So if someone's dealing with poison itself, then they have to cut it off. That's when you have to cut something off. So there are times that we are dealing with something like that, and that's when something has to be done. But that has to be determined also conclusively, right? Someone's not going to go into surgery because the doctor says, from the lump, it seems to me that you have cancer, right? You're not going to go into surgery for that. You're going to have it tested out first. But once it's conclusive, then there has to be something hasty done. But that's not what we're talking about over here. As for your doubts about the basics of Yiddishkeit, there's a whole... Now the Rebbe is addressing his actual dilemma, or his actual question, that is Yiddishkeit really what I should be doing? I don't know if this is good for me. So the Rebbe says, if you have questions about the Yiddishkeit, there's a whole body of literature, classical and contemporary, including in English, that deal with the subject. Much of it is based not on faith, but on fact. Suffice it to mention here, by way of example, and because of its timeliness, having recently celebrated Zman Matan Torasenu, the holiday of the giving of the Torah, which is the holiday of Shavuos, that the divine revelation at Sinai, you got to hear this, we may have had this in a previous letter, but it's very a profound idea, that the divine revelation at Sinai, the idea that God revealed himself to the Jewish people at Mount Sinai, right? That means that there were approximately, we estimate, around 3 million Jews. The Rebbe will calculate it here. So the divine revelation at Sinai, when God pronounced the Decalogue, that was the Ten Commandments, and gave us the Torah, is one of the most scientifically established events in human history. You hear what the Rebbe is saying. The Rebbe is saying the event of God revealing himself to the Jewish people at Mount Sinai is a scientifically proven event. It's not a belief. It's not a matter of faith. It's one of the most scientifically established events in all of history. So if you take all of history, of world history, of human history, there may not be any other event that can be proven to have happened as factually as the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. How so? It is based on the evidence and personal experience of 600,000 male adults. That's, by the way, adults between the ages of 20 and 60. Besides women and children, which has been transmitted in identical form from parents to children throughout the generations in an uninterrupted chain of tradition, further authenticated by virtually identical daily observances of the same mitzvahs by Jews in all generations and in all countries of the world, with such devotion and commitment that they were ready to make every sacrifice, even martyrdom, in their loyalty to the one God, one Torah, and one Jewish people. Here's what the Rebbe is saying. I'm going to try and break this down a little bit. We had 600,000 men between the ages of 20 and 60 at Mount Sinai, which means we had males under the age of 20. We had males over the age of 60. We had women at least of equal number, between the ages of 20 and 60, which means there's also a lower age and a higher age, right? And if you add all that together, we estimate there should have been around 3 million Jews at Mount Sinai. Every single one of them described to their children what they experienced. In other words, if I were to ask you, we're going to draw a comparison here. If I were to ask you, did Alexander the Great live? I'm going to trust that you will all say yes. I hope you're all going to say yes, right? We all know Alexander the Great lived. How do we know he lived? How do we know? How, in fact, do you know? We know because there are history books. So there are books that say that he lived. That's how we know. How does your mother know? How does your father know that Alexander the Great lived? They read a book and the book says that he lived, right? So happens we also know because he's mentioned in the Talmud, right? So we have a book that was written 1,500 years ago that says that he lived. But we can go back, right? But that's about it. How do we know that God spoke to the Jewish people at Mount Sinai? Not because there is a book that says that he lived, or 20 books, or 1,000 books that says that he lived, because there were 3 million people who experienced it and told their children, this is what we experienced. And their children told their children that our grandfather experienced, your grandfather experienced it, your grandmother experienced this. And their grandchildren, and their children, and their children. So what my father told me was what his father told him all the way back to Mount Sinai. And if you want it to be proven even more, the things that God said at Mount Sinai and that Moses came back down with, which was beyond the Ten Commandments at Mount Sinai, Jews in countries all over the world are doing the exact same way. Further evidence of the fact that all of this happened at Mount Sinai. So there is nothing, now you tell me a single other event in history that has such verification. So the Rebbe starts here with him just to say, if you want to know intellectually, not based on faith, right? As a fact, we know that God communicated the Torah to Mount Sinai. There is no other, and we compare this to other religions, there's no other religion that has anything remotely close to this. Every other religion is based on a claim of revelation, right? Yashka claims that God revealed himself to him. John Smith, the founder of Mormonism, claims that he was driving in upstate New York and he had some experience. Muhammad claims he was sitting behind a mountain and God revealed himself to him. These are all claims. Did they happen? You have to trust one person to know if they happened. Judaism, you're not trusting one person. You're trusting the entire Jewish people. So that's very compelling. Needless to say, the layman cannot be familiar with all the sources and has no way of verifying the facts. But what does a layman do in other areas, medical science, or for example? What does a layman do? He's saying to this man, the Rebbe's writing to this man, you're a layman, right? So you don't know everything in the Torah, how to verify, how to prove everything in the Torah, is it true or not? So what does a layman do? What do? I'm a layman, and I go to my doctor. My doctor says, right, that I need a certain medication. I have a certain illness. I saw your blood work. You have a certain issue. You need to take a certain medication for a week. I have no way of proving that. I don't know how to read blood work, right? I don't know that this medication helps for that. I just know that he knows that. A patient may well have his doubts about the efficacy of a drug prescribed by his physician. Will he refuse to take it until he has been able to attend medical courses and learn all that his doctor has learned in his lifetime studies and experience? He'd be a fool. Will he not rely on the authority of the medical specialist? If he has doubts about the expertise of one doctor, he can obtain a second opinion and a third, which is, by the way, what the Rebbe always tells us to do. Okay, you want to verify. You're going to go to some other experts and just confirm that what this expert said is accurate, which is a very wise thing to do, which is what we always do based on the Rebbe's guidance. But when all agree that he needs that medicine, but if you go to a second doctor and the third doctor and they all say the reading is clear and this is what you need, and the prescribed medical regimen, would he refuse to take that expert advice even if he still has strong doubts about it? He's got to be crazy to not to listen to the doctor. And actually it would be a violation of Torah not to listen to the doctor, by the way. By the same token, if you will ask any specialist in Yiddishkeit, in Judaism, A person who has dedicated his life to the study of Torah and actually lives by the Torah and mitzvahs in his everyday life and conduct. There's the Rebbe saying, how do you determine if someone is a specialist in Judaism? A, they have to be a person who dedicates his life to the study of Torah. And B, they have to be living a life that's aligned with Torah and mitzvahs. Someone just told me that they have a relative in their family who was a rabbi of a certain denomination outside of Orthodoxy for many years. And he says it's just, he was just like sharing with me because it was very surprising to him. He says, since he retired, it's as if he forgot everything he learned and he hardly observes anything. Right now, why is this? This is because this person went to, again, I'm not making a comment on a broad population of people. I'm just commenting on this specific scenario. Okay, this individual went to a quote unquote seminary to get a certificate that says he's a rabbi, so he can play a role for a community, but he was never aligned with that role. So the moment he's not playing the role, so he's not doing it anymore. So this is what the Rebbe is saying, that a specialist in Judaism is someone who studies and lives in his everyday life. That means if you're going to spy on him when he's in the Bahamas on vacation, you're going to see that he prays in the morning, and then on Shabbos he still observes Shabbos, and nothing changes. Because he's authentic to it. So the Rebbe is saying, if you ask any specialist, so you have to go to, just like you have to go to numerous doctors, if you go to a number of specialists, what is the right thing for you to do? The answer will be the same. Because Jews have only one Torah and one halacha. So the answer will be the same if you ask all the specialists. Indeed, if in matters of physical health, it is logical that Naseh must come before Nishma. For medical health, we know that you have to do before you understand. We're not going to wait for you to go study medicine for 2 years before you take your medication. How much more so in the matters of the eternal soul? When it comes to matters of the soul, which are more important than the body. How much more so is it important for us to submit ourselves to what we should be doing before we fully understand it all, while we're studying it, which may take many years till we understand many aspects, which the well-being of the body is also intimately connected. As we know that the health of a body is very much connected to the health of a soul. I have taken time out to write to you at some length, even though it is also common sense, and it is not original with me. In other words, I'm saying anything I wrote here is not my original ideas. I'm writing to you basic common sense, but I still took the time to write all of this out and spell it all out and more in such sources as the Kuzari. And the Rebbe says, where can you find this? It's not original with me, for you can find it and more in such sources as the Kuzari, which is a fascinating work, and other works of our great Jewish philosophers, because I have in mind the saying of our sages, there's no point in bewailing the past. The Rebbe says, I have in mind this idea, which the Rebbe was a very big proponent of, which we should all be. Let's not bemoan what happened in the past. Okay? Bygones are bygones. We did something, we made a mistake, or we did something wrong, or we misbehaved, whatever it is. Okay, it is what it is. But the main thing is to focus on moving forward. I trust that the wrong actions you are contemplating and have already initiated as a result of your woefully erroneous conclusion may yet be reversed, and that this letter may help you see your way clear to do what is good and proper also for you and your family, which is also why this letter is being sent via special delivery. So the Rebbe actually sent this letter, a special delivery, so that you get to the person very quickly. Sometimes the Rebbe did that to show the person how much the Rebbe felt that the matter at hand was urgent. So the Rebbe actually made sure the person got it very quickly. Incidentally, this letter is being written on the day before the fast of the 17th day of Tammuz. Now, for those who are, again, I'm so sorry, I apologize for continuously referencing the JLI course. that we're doing now. It just so happens that there's a lot of overlap. And by the way, you can, if you're not signed up to the course, you can go to the website, jewishacademy.info, find class recordings, and you can follow the classes there. Of course, you have deprived yourself of the great benefit of being attending the live class where you can feel the actual energy of the class. It's nothing like the video, but still, at least you'll get some of it. And in our last lesson, lesson 4, what did we discuss? The value of time, how much time adds meaning to our lives. So you'll notice, and here the Rebbe is doing it again. We mentioned in the class how the Rebbe was very focused on time. The Rebbe did this in many letters. The Rebbe writes, incidentally, this letter was being written the day before the fast of the 17th of Tammuz. The Rebbe is saying, the time that I'm writing this letter to you is not insignificant, because time is very significant. So commemorating the fateful breach in the wall of Jerusalem under siege, which is what happened on the 17th day of Tammuz, which eventually led to the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, it reminds us, every one of us, to do our utmost to eliminate the cause that led to the destruction and Gullus. That we have, this day that the Rebbe was writing letters was the day before, the day that we fast, commemorating the day that our enemies breached the wall of Jerusalem, which led to 3 weeks later, the destruction of the temple. Because this was the wall that was around the city, ultimately they got to the temple. And it reminds us that we have to do our best to eliminate what caused the destruction, and us being in exile, the sole cause being, as we say in our prayers, because of our sins we have been exiled from our land. Because we have done things which are not aligned with the will of God, with what God wants from us. It particularly reminds us how careful one must be not to let anything make even a crack in the wall that protects Jerusalem. The Rebbe says Jerusalem in quotes, which the word Jerusalem, Yerushalayim, comes from the two words, Yarei Shalim, the inner Beis HaMikdash, the complete, that wholesome awe of God, which the inner Beis HaMikdash, which is most cherished possession of a Jew. That means our soul. The indestructible counterpart of the physical temple that stood in Jerusalem of old. This inner sanctuary is what God desires most, as implied in his order and request, let them make me a Mikdash and I will dwell among them, or within them. The verse says, when God commands us to build the temple, it says, you shall make for me a temple and I will dwell in them. How many temples do the Jewish people have? 1. So why does it say I will dwell in them? Because it is alluding to the idea that every Jew is a temple and God lives within every one of us. And that when we build ourselves to be a conducive place for God to live, then God shines through us. And that means living in alignment with the purpose God put us here. And if God designed us as a Jew, that means living in alignment with the Torah and mitzvahs, the light of Torah and mitzvahs. Within them, within every Jew and every Jewish home. And with this, the Rebbe concludes this letter. Okay, we have 2 minutes. Let's do one more letter because it's a short letter. Okay, letter 21. Honesty. Shalom, this was letter 1978. Shalom Abracha, blessing and success. Or actually, peace and blessing, I should say. Peace and blessing. I am in receipt of your letter of May 18th, in which you write about your present state and feeling towards Jews, Yiddishkeit, the Torah, which you blame on the attitude towards you on the part of the yeshiva and its students. Okay, see here what's going on over here. What's going on over here is this person has a negative attitude apparently towards Jews and to Judaism, a Jew, and the Torah. And he says the reason why I have that attitude is because of the yeshiva and its students. Now, we don't know the details of it, right? But something happened, or either something happened, or there's a sense that he has from the yeshiva and its students, and therefore he's turned off and he blames his attitude on them. By the way, I just want to let you know that many people convey this sentiment to me. They say that because of the way religious Jews treat me when I go to Brooklyn or something like that, or to Borough Park, I feel turned off from Judaism. And very often, by the way, it's not that the people, what they tell me, I ask them, so what did they do to you? Right? Like, what did you experience? It's not even that the people were rude to them in any way, it's just that they weren't so gracious to them. Now, I understand, and everyone should be gracious, but I can tell you, I was very often not gracious to people because either I felt the person wasn't open to me. You know, I walked into a room yesterday, and there was a guy there with his wife and kids. And when I walked in, he looked at me. He was the first time he was here. Okay, so he was clearly uncomfortable. His body language demonstrated to me that he was a little bit uneasy which I relate to very well. And he looked at me, I don't know if he figured out I'm the rabbi or not, but I definitely looked like had some religious presence. And then he turned around to his wife. So I understood from the body language that he wasn't so comfortable, like he didn't know how to approach me. So I hung around in the room for a while, spoke to different people. It was a kids event, right? And then when I had the right opportunity, I approached him, and we had a very I was able to make him put him more at ease, and and just get to know each other a little bit. And it was really nice. In other words, he could have, in theory, I don't think he would have done this, but he could have said, "Oh, the rabbi's not a nice guy." Let's say I had not gotten to actually speaking to him, which many times happens. So then he could have walked out and said, "Oh, the rabbi's he's not a warm rabbi," or something like that, right? Now, it's a little bit of a judgment, right? It's a little bit of a judgment in that case. I think a lot of times that's what we do, right? Where we didn't get what we needed or what we wanted, and maybe I should have been more forthcoming. Maybe that's also true, right? But still, in the case where I wasn't, all right. But we don't have to interpret it necessarily that way. But sometimes we are projecting what we believe someone believes on them, and then they believe it. They quote unquote believe it because we projected it on them, and then we live it out. That's a lot of life happens that way. Just saying that. So the Rebbe says to him, but sometimes, I will say also, sometimes people act inappropriately. Like a yeshiva student shouldn't act that way. And they do, they're rude, or they're not nice, or they're judgmental, or whatever it is, and it turns people off. That's really terrible. And that also happens. So needless to say, the connection is most surprising, for it's plain and obvious that a Jew, whoever he may be, who believes in the Torah and does his best to observe its mitzvos, does it because of his personal commitment to God's Torah and mitzvos. So the Rebbe tells him, whoa, is your relationship with God contingent upon how people treat you? Right? Are you only going to have a good relationship with God when people are nice to you? Like, what does that have to do with anything? Your personal commitment to God and Torah mitzvahs should be between you and God. The fact there are people who are acting inappropriately should have no impact on your observance. This is a very big insight the Rebbe is giving in being a victim and then blaming. In other words, we need to have true values which are independent of the way we're being treated, which were given to each and every Jew at Sinai. And as our sages tell us, that the souls of all Jews of all generations were present and accepted the Torah and mitzvahs. So God came at Mount Sinai and spoke to you and said, I am letting you know what your purpose in this world is. What does that have to do with the yeshiva students, how they treat you? Hence, if a Jew should declare, God forbid, that he does not accept the Ten Commandments because his friends or a teacher do not conduct themselves as they should, I do not think that anyone will say that this is a proper or sensible approach. Sounds like this guy was a student actually in yeshiva, from the way the Rebbe is writing this. And by the way, I do know many people who have been treated very inappropriately by teachers or fellow students, and their grievance leads them to actually be alienated from Judaism. The Rebbe is addressing that here, and I understand that. I understand how that happens, of course. But the Rebbe is addressing it and saying it's not an honest way to deal with things, because we have to develop a relationship with God which is independent of all the other things that go on in our lives. To put it in a different way, the Rebbe says, if a teacher whom you respect will say that 2 times 2 is 5, it is incorrect. And if a teacher whom you do not respect will say that 2 times 2 is 4, it's nevertheless correct. For truth is independent. So the Rebbe is trying to convey to him, your commitment to truth has to be independent of the way people are. That's a separate issue that has to be dealt with. But that you can't let truth be compromised because you're hurt. Judging by your writing, there is surely no need to elaborate to you on what is self-evident, with blessings.